Welcome to today's New England Himss webinar, presented by our premier sponsor, Commvault, titled Recovery Readiness, Getting Back to Business with Complete Data Protection, presented by Lance Shaw. All lines have been muted upon entry today, so please send your questions via the Q&A feature, and we will answer them at the end of the session. Lance is the Director of Worldwide Solutions Marketing at Commvault. He enjoys distilling technical product details to showcase the measurable value customers can realize. He is involved with a wide range of technologies, including data protection, security, ransomware, recovery, cloud solutions, compliance, and more. Please join me in welcoming Lance today.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and great to be here. And thanks everybody for attending. As Elisa said, we're going to cover a fair amount of topics today. But we want to focus in on recovery readiness, and we're going to be talking about getting back to business, right, with complete data protection. Now, I'll be clear, obviously, as you can see, I work for Commvault, and I'm going to be giving some examples of how Commvault addresses some of the challenges. But really, the net takeaway, my goal here today is to get you thinking, if you're not already, about what your plans are and how you approach keeping your business running in the face of the various threats that we all face, unfortunately, right? So there will be some Commvault examples, things like that, but obviously this is really to encourage you to how to think about some of these challenges as we all have to face them, right? There's just no escape. So let's get into it, right? Let's get into some PowerPoint slides. So anyway, the first thing I just want to call out, and this may be preaching to the choir, but we all know that ransomware is everywhere, right? I saw another example just this morning. It just seems like not a week goes by where there's not some story about some company that got hit or challenge being faced or trying to recover, right? So you all know that, right? You see it everywhere. It's not going anywhere. The challenges just keep on coming. So what do you do about it? Ransomware gets a lot of the attention, but let's face it, it's not the only way your data is potentially under attack. Sometimes those threats are simple, equipment failures or hardware failures of some kind, right, or a network failure. Ransomware is certainly, or malware of various types, certainly are expanding and getting more complicated, especially when you've got legitimate professional or state-run organizations basically funding an industry, right? That's basically what it's coming down to. I read this morning that how North Korea is funding a lot of their development of the next generation of weaponry through ransomware and security attacks. Terrific, right? But there's also everything down to human error, right? And that happens a lot, unfortunately. All of us are. Turns out we're not infallible, and people make mistakes or click on the wrong things, right? So I just want to point out the fact that while ransomware gets the headlines, there's way more to it, and there's way more to think about. So great, thanks, Lance. That's wonderful. So excited. There's all these threats. And the reality is that a lot of these, a majority of threats come from within an organization. That's sort of what I mean by, well, ransomware attacks they get in and somebody inside the organization clicks on something, that it's nearly impossible to stop humans from doing that. But what we can do is, minimize that threat, minimize the threat exposure, and make sure that when something does happen, and I didn't say if, but when it does happen, that you can actually do something about it, right? And when you think about your business, the one stat here that that I kind of like to call out is, a full third of businesses that were hit with malware, it takes them a while to recover, and time is money. I always think the ransom is the easy part. It's not easy, but it's the cheap part comparatively. Of course, now organizations are realizing that, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well charge it. I might as well up the ante on the price. So it gets real expensive real quick when you think about how what would happen to your business if you were down for a day or 2 days or a week. I'm gonna guess it's not good. So how do we get to recover? How should you think about getting to recovery readiness? Well, I mean, the first thing is don't give me a lot of complicated tools. That would be good. We all have a lot of tools. We have more software. Throwing software at a problem is generally not the complete solution to the answer, right? It takes more than that. Wouldn't it be nice? I just installed the software and magically everything was perfect. Well, you want to make it simple as possible, right? You want to have a single place to manage data, and your data is all over the place, which gets to the topic of being flexible. You've got a lot to consider in terms of how you back up your data, how you protect it, how you recover it. Certain things are more important than others, right? Obviously, critical application data, EHR systems, your Epic or Meditech systems, all that data is way more important than the email about the ice cream social next month. There's obviously there are tiers of data, and that comes into part of the plan. But you've got to have the flexibility to do it all. And secondly, kind of goes without saying, yes, we all want to be efficient. Anything you can do to streamline operations, right, and take advantage of automation. I think that's really the key takeaway. I want to be able to move data, place it where I need it to be. I need to do it automatically. I need to do it or on schedules. The manual component, but that's really at odds with being simple, right? It simply can't be. How are you supposed to scale with all of the data in all of your different systems with your existing staff, I'm going to bet, and not leverage automation? So automated disaster recovery and the validation of that data ahead of time is all about being confident that when something happens, you're ready. So what are the steps to think about? Well, the first one is the obvious, be sure to breathe in and breathe out. But the general idea of creating a plan, right? As I mentioned, throwing software at a problem is not the solution. It's part of the solution. It's an important part of the solution. Don't get me wrong, but every situation is unique. Your situation is unique. And so you have to develop a plan that goes with your situation, right? Your staff, your data locations, the prioritization and the tiering, all of that. But then once that plan is in place, then obviously you have to make sure that you can prevent or quickly be aware of attacks. That's really a lot of the key component of it. Or be aware that something bad just happened, no matter what it was. Somebody just deleted an entire folder structure. Somebody wiped out a database, whatever the scenario was, right? And then constant monitoring. I think I always think about, I can't remember, I'm sorry, I've seen all the Harry Potter movies. I don't remember which one it was. Somebody out there probably does, but I always remember the line, constant vigilance, and they thought the guy was crazy. Turns out he wasn't crazy. He knew it was coming, right? So that monitoring and consistently being aware of what's going on, and then being able to quickly restore and testing your plan, right? Because things change, things evolve, your business evolves. You acquire a company, you fired up a new SaaS-based application that is now critical to a segment of your business. Certainly in healthcare, there's lots of segments of organizations, right? And you could be, there's a larger corporation and there's individual segments, all of you doing something differently. That has to be adapted for, at least accounted for, if not consolidated. So let's talk a little bit about creating a plan. Well, many of you on this call, you may already be familiar with a 3-2-1 backup strategy. It's sort of the almost, if you will, a default for a backup strategy. But some of you may not. So simply just kind of highlight the fact that part of this is identifying and prioritizing, like I mentioned, your critical data, but then where you place it. You're basically doing 3 copies on a couple different types of media, and you've got an offsite copy. And increasingly, that offsite copy, in fact, dare I say, usually the offsite copy is now in the cloud. Many of you may still be dealing with tape. Tape is still popular. Every time I think, well, no one's really using tape anymore. Wrong. Lots of companies are still using tape to physically transport it offsite and put it in a top secret location and then be able to recover it later. As we all know, that directly impacts your recovery point objective or recovery time objectives, I should say, because it just takes a lot longer, right? So when we talk about downtime being the most expensive part of the equation, that's usually why tape is being shown the door in favor of a cloud-based solution. So, but those essential elements, right? Like, what is it you're protecting? When, right? That gets back to the prioritization, right? Around your service level agreements, what you've committed to within the company that you can actually meet. And then we're going to talk a bit about having the confidence that you can actually do it. And then who is doing it, right? What players are involved? So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Because a framework for backup and recovery has kind of 5 major steps. I'm going to walk through these a little bit. I mean, the first thing we need to think about, we were talking about planning. Well, you can't have a plan if you don't know what you're protecting. And it's always surprising to me that, well, it's not surprising, it's not the right word, but it's informative that a lot of organizations don't always know what, all the data that is out there that they should be protecting. And it's natural, it's common. You know, things pop up, especially in the era of SaaS delivered applications. You know, a single organization can go out and say, well, I'm not going to tell IT, I'm just going to go out and this is a great application. I'll run my corporate credit card through. I'll get this expensed. I'll get a PO cut. I'll do it myself, right? So shadow IT is it's called, right? It's been a thing for a while. It's still a part of the issue when you go out to identify what on earth do I have and how can I make sure that this data is going to be readily available, and how do I mitigate any kind of risks associated with that. And we'll walk through these around protection, around monitor, respond, and recovery. And all of these are key components to how you address making sure that your business is up 24/7. And if something does go down, it's down, that it's at 23.99 by 7. Right? So first up, identifying. Knowing your data, identifying your critical, your sensitive data, and mitigating those risks, and applying appropriate levels of data protection and management to that. And that's really the key, right? That's great. Now I know it. What do I got to do? And you know, a good system for protecting your data and recovering your data. I always think about recovering as way more important than backup, right? Backup is nice, recovery is critical. But the prioritization that you put in place and the plans and the tiers, all of that can be automated, right? So, you know, like I said, something that is related to your actually critical to the business staying up and running, that's first. That's tier 1. Maybe it's tier 0, right? It has to be up immediately. So your plan, and you put a plans associated with that. So if something new comes along, it automatically goes into the plan, right? So based on certain criteria, and kind of speaking of automation, you define how you want to run your universe, your data universe, and then you set those plans so when somebody else fires up a bunch of new VMs and they're running this type of application, voila, they are protected automatically with this sort of application. Cool. So then the next part is that we talk about a lot is just centralizing. Really one of the things that we run into a lot with companies that as they struggle with their sort of as assessing their own maturity for how they can be ready, they are usually dealing with fragmented systems. We're all dealing with fragmented data, silos of data everywhere, but they're also dealing with multiple systems to protect that data. And that happens over time. Well, I bought this product to protect this data, and this was for my VMs, and well, this is for that cloud data over here. Next thing you know, you got a mess on your hands, and they're all managed separately, which creates staffing concerns. So having a single pane of glass, you know, I'm sorry, did I use that term? I know it's overused, but you know, having a single place to manage your environment and be able to set those plans and have visibility, most importantly, and kind of gets into that monitoring component, is critical. So, and then you know, having secure user access and controls, right? So we talk about you know, a AAA framework, which is really about authentication, you know, making sure you are who you say you are, authorization, that you have the access legitimately, and then the auditing and tracking of that information so that you know what has occurred. You can always go back and look, right? So that's what a AAA framework is. Again, a term that is kind of commonly used in the space, so you may have heard it already, depending on your level of involvement. You know, when I think about preventing attacks, if only is what I say, right? If I could keep you know, Steve in in accounting from clicking on that phishing email, wouldn't that be great? It'd be magic. If I could prevent ransomware entirely, well, I'd be a very wealthy person for one thing. The problem would be solved, right? We wouldn't even be talking about this. But the fact of the matter is that you know, I want to minimize my attack vectors. I want to minimize my exposure. So that's what we talk about, 3 levels of doing that. There's one is just your foundation, right? Just reducing that attack surface, making sure that no protocols are leaving you exposed, there's ports, configurations, daemons in your environment, that kind of thing, right? So the foundational network and physical connectivity level, and then the next level is applications, right? We talk about Epic, we talk about Meditech, we talk about, you know, various. I always think of Epic, right? Sorry, it just seems to be so prevalent, but there are others. You know, the fact of the matter is there's lots of controls there in those applications that control access, right? I know I see it when I go to the doctor's office, right? There's all kinds of logins and security questions about that, but it also has to go into the backup data and the protection of that data, right? And then finally, the ransomware, the protection, the data protection that allows you to recover very quickly to make sure that you can keep your business up and running. So all 3 of these steps are kind of critical. But then people say, well, you're talking to me about stuff that I don't even know that I have control over, right? So foundation hardening, I got to go speak to somebody else in the IT about that, or some other organization potentially that runs my infrastructure for me. So one of the things that we do, and this is what we do in Commvault, right, is we give you a security assessment dashboard, right, that lets you see, you can click in and see at a glance where you need to, and I know this is a little bit small on the screen, so apologize for that, trying to fit this all in, but there's a fair amount of controls here to help you identify what you need to do, assess your risk, look at guidance for what you still need to do, and then take action or view reports on suggested actions, right? So that fundamentally helps you organize your security controls and helps you identify gaps. Like, wow, we don't have that turned on. Are you sure? Let's go find out, right? It's amazing what these uncover, to be honest with you. So again, it's just something that we do at Commvault to help make sure that customers can see everything in one place, right? As fun as it is to jump between applications, rather not, right? So that visibility is pretty critical. I think the next thing to talk about is protecting or having an immutable architecture. Immutability. I'm seeing that word more and more flying around because you got to have a good buzzword. You've got to have that, right? The immutability of making sure that nothing can be changed, right? It's unchangeable. And so we think about that. That's whatever is being backed up can and will be recoverable within the defined lifecycle, right? It can't be corrupted, it can't be changed, it can't be deleted, it can't be encrypted by ransomware. It's there, right? So there are three levels to that. One is the data locks around who can access that, right? So the data locking is one of those things that applies storage locking technology, application locking technology, and the infrastructure hardening that we talked about earlier to make sure that no one else can access that data, that no other system can access that data. And there are many little segments in there around multi-factor authentication and making sure that that no unauthorized changes can be made. The next thing you'll hear about a lot is the need for an air gap in isolation. This is something that tape did very well. That was one thing it was a no-brainer with tape. Yeah, it's definitely an air gap. In fact, it's in a truck and it's somewhere else right now. So there's a gap. And it's isolated and protected. The downside, of course, as we talked about, is that you simply it just took a long time, right? You had to ship your data from another state or something. That's obviously a little bit of a problem. So that's absolutely key. And we'll talk a little bit about cloud air gapping or virtual air gapping and how that works and how you can take advantage of that. The third piece of all this is to immutability. Is data validation. It's verification. You have to automatically validate your data against corruption and have that resiliency inherent in the underlying platform. And you're continuously ensuring that's the case. And so that is kind of a regular built-in set of checks. You can think of it that way, right? Where you always know that what you've backed up is valid, not corrupted. Even if something else is corrupted or damaged, your backups are intact and stay that way. I like to think about the need for multi-layered security. It's sort of like securing a house, right? And everybody's house is different. If you live on a ground floor apartment in New York, you're probably you've probably got locks on all your windows, right? Sorry, New York. But whatever the case may be, right? Or if you're let's stay with the New York analogy. You're in a 10th floor. Let's go. Say, okay, sorry. How about a 4th floor walk up? Because I'm not walking 10 floors, but you're in a 4th floor walk up. You're less concerned about your windows, but you're more concerned about the front door, right, or any other back access to the house. So I think all of us, if you think about your house, you have a front door at the very least, the locks, right? And you may or may not have security cameras or monitoring systems or window locks and sensors. You've certainly got fire detectors, CO2 detectors. You've got all these different layers that are going on in the house. And eventually you've got a safe, right, for your most important thing. I think the big thing to think about here is that, you in this analogy, is that you apply the right layers to what's needed in your business, but you also want to apply the idea of zero trust, right? And by that, I mean, it's kind of, I always think of it like I never assume that, you know, my private information is safe. Continually validating trust, right? Like if you invite somebody into your house, come on in. You don't just automatically then give them the keys to or the code to the safe. No, you may or may not know them. They might be a contractor coming into work at your house. They might be your best friend. There's different levels of trust, but at some point, you know, you're always validating that you are who you are. You're always double checking authentication. You're not just saying once, okay, you authenticated. I know who you are. Have a nice day. You can come in for the next 6 months or a year. No, you're continually making sure, you know, via two-factor authentication or other mechanisms that you're continuously validating that who people are and the appropriate level of trust. You know, you'll let them in your first floor, but you can't, you know what, I don't really want you going upstairs, okay? So, so this is always, again, always about continuous monitoring. So you can set all these plans in place, you can set the controls in place, but you're always continuously going back, monitoring, adjusting, things change, people's level change, roles change, data locations change. It's a continuing scenario. A little bit about air gapping in a setup to talking about cloud virtual air gapping, just to kind of level the playing field if some of you are not entirely familiar. And there's a lot of diagrams on this slide, but really think about it this way, right? It's, you know, it's a drawbridge analogy. Where backups and because this is critical. If your primary data go down, obviously you don't want your backups being corrupted as well. This is a common mistake that was made in the past where people were replicating data or relying on replication to protect their data. Data gets corrupted, replication takes place. Sure, replicate, build a new replica over here in a nice safe location. It's an exact copy. It's corrupted. Thanks. So I've got a bunch of corrupted copies now. Outstanding. So you want to make sure that those backup copies are completely isolated and secure. So one of the ways you do that is there's multiple components to this, but effectively, you know, is that your Commvault and Commvault alone is requesting access. Effectively, that gateway is opened. It's a secure channel. I know exactly who it is. It cannot be impersonated. And then once complete, you know, everything's completely automatically powered off, and the gateway is effectively closed, right? So completely isolated. Connectivity through an encrypted tunnel, and whatever that secondary site might be, that's, you know that those copies are secure, and you're going back and validating those later, right? So it's like a double check almost, as it were. So now you enter the cloud. Now we offer a variety at Commvault. We offer something called Multilayered Cloud Storage Service, which makes it really, really easy to get to the cloud. Excuse me, I'm getting all verklempt over virtual air gaps. But the fundamental idea is that I want to take advantage of the cloud. I don't want to pay for tape or suffer the time consequences of tape, and I want to improve, you know, my recovery point objectives, my recovery time objectives, and I want to be able to make that happen automatically. But I still cannot compromise on security, right? So we're implementing a multi-layered approach that includes storage locking and as the data moves from one system out to the cloud. And so this is an effective way to introduce the cloud, use it as a quote unquote virtual air gap, because there is a temporary connection out to the cloud, but it's a secure connection, much in the same way we were just talking about the gateway analogy, right? That I can move my data there securely, and then that gives me huge improvements in terms of recovery time. So I think you know, the next phase we want to talk about then is, all right, so I've identified my data, I've built out a plan on protecting that data in its various prioritization. Now I need to monitor. Well, so none of us are going to sit in a dashboard and hit refresh every 5 minutes and try to make sure that everything's fine, right? We all have lives and other things to do. So you've got to rely on a system that is automated and that is actively monitoring, right? So this is something that we recommend. As you might guess, this is something that Commvault does. All these things are things that Commvault does. But these are, anytime you're looking at your systems and how you protect data, are you doing these things would be my advice to you, right? Are you able to monitor for live threats? Can you monitor live file system activity, right? If something happens, we talk about ransomware, but those in a similar fashion. Also, all those other ways your data can be damaged or attacked, including human error. You know, that's the kind of thing that you want to be kind of constantly looking for, right? So there's that. So, and of course, alerting that goes into that. And then there's the monitoring of the backups, right, as well. We also want to have a security mechanism for monitoring any sort of active unauthorized system changes, and then event monitoring. So anything that's malicious showing up in your event log. The other thing that we've run into is like, great, I'm in IT. Many of you probably have looked through event logs. That can be a lot, right? So how do I prioritize that? Call out only the critical things and make sure they get my attention immediately, and then leverage triggers or automated systems or integration to kick off secondary activity if I detect something. So all of that has to be there in terms of doing that. And imagine trying to do this in 3-4 different systems. That starts getting hairy, right? And by the way, it's never going to be consistent because different systems do different things. They don't have all this functionality, for example. So you're compromised perhaps in one section using one tool that you wouldn't if you could have consistency across all. So, all right, well, so back in the spirit of, well, how does Commvault do it, right? And that's really what I can speak to best, is this bringing everything together, easy for me to say, into a customized web-based user interface, right? So that you can manage your entire environment. We talked about having default configuration values and plans in place, for routine tasks or for any new arrivals of data, and being able to initiate a discovery, being able to monitor, being able to generate reports. I mentioned reporting because it used to be that maybe this would stay within the realm of IT, but because of ransomware, because of the importance of data, because of the proliferation of data in so many different locations, now you are expected to report up on your readiness. The C-level staff, the partners, the senior executive teams, like, are we ready for this? And especially in healthcare, unfortunately, right? That's a common request. I'd be surprised if that didn't happen. That I have to be confident that I have the ability to and prove it in a weekly, quarterly, I hope it's quarterly, report up the food chain to be able to demonstrate that we are in fact able to recover, right? So all of these things, access to information, role-based access control so that I can delegate. I don't have to be doing it all myself. I can give department heads or other critical people access to a subset of the information that affects them so they can see what's going on, just to free up my IT staff, right? So all that having in a single location is essential. So great. That's when we're thinking about, that's monitoring, but let's think about response. So something bad happens. It hits the fan, as they say, right? So what do I do about this, and how do I, instigate a fast response? Well, there's a couple things. One is you want to be able to make sure that you're restoring to a clean house, and you want to make sure that if there was a copy of a corrupted file or an infected file that's in your system, you want to make sure you can actually delete it. Commvault does that. You can actually remove your threats from within your data. Even if it gets into your backup data, you can remove it, right? So if there's a file sitting in someone's folder that gets backed up and then we later find out that it was corrupted, or it's because sometimes, as we know, ransomware data gets into a system and then it hibernates, right? It'll sit there 30, 60, 90 days. You have no idea it's there, and then surprise, it takes off, right? So you have to be able to have that as well. I mentioned automatically validating backups, right? That you can always know that they are intact and not corrupted themselves. That they cannot be attacked. But most importantly, any system that you set up here has got to be able to tie into other workflows and APIs, and so that you can have that. And that really comes into play when we talk about responding and integrating into other systems, so you know about it quickly. You can take action quickly. You can have automatic triggers kick off to protect, move, or otherwise be notified about any kind of data corruption or an issue that's causing your business to be down. The other thing is that on the flip side, and I was talking with Forrester Research about this not long ago, was the fact that the evidence gathering and the discovery can take a fair amount of time, and you don't have that amount of time, right? So you have to be able to go back to a clean copy very quickly, and with confidence know that is corruption free, as well as then you need to be able to go back and discover how did that happen, how did that happen, where did it arrive from, that sort of thing. So some of the e-discovery tools and help you understand what happened as opposed to just recover. When you're notified, just as an example, when there's an anomaly, right? There's something unusual happened. For what Commvault does is we trigger off a series of events, and depending on the severity, different actions can take place, right? But we've had numerous customers where they say, "This is how I found out something wacky was going on, or something unusual or irregular was happening." A sudden, rapid number of file access at the disk level, where suddenly very unusual behavior. Like why is all this activity going on? We also we learn what is normal, right? When an automated system understands over time that make something up. Sunday at 1 a.m. there's this big job that runs, right? And it's very disk intensive. So that's a known entity that can be aware of that particular specific item. Anything else would be abnormal, and I would want to notify you about it, right? So there's alerts and triggers that have to occur automatically based on any kind of anomaly, right? Even if I go in as a ridiculous employee who's trying to sabotage something, and and I decide I want to delete a whole lot of files or a whole lot of folders or anything else, you're immediately going to be notified, right? It doesn't have to be a ransomware attack, but it can be any of those things we talked about earlier. And so then the recovery aspect, that's the next component. And when we think about recovery and getting your business operations up quickly, obviously that reduces the impact of the disaster. But this is where you really want to be able to leverage orchestration with workflows and APIs to be able to do out of place recoveries. That in case that happens, right? You've got to be your overall disaster recovery execution is going to have to include integration with other systems. So I think it's pretty obvious why fast restores are important, right? You obviously want to reduce the spread of any kind of infection. You want to streamline that and automate as much as possible. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's proving that if something goes awry, you're back up and running very quickly. You've got executives yelling, "What's going on? Systems are down, unavailable." In worst case scenarios, patient data not available for those that need it on the floor of a hospital. That kind of scenario, that faster every minute, dare I say every second counts, right? So that being able to restore very quickly, is absolutely critical. So there's the idea of having this gets back to the plan, having workflows defined, having the procedures defined, and having everybody running from that playbook. It's almost like a football team, right? You've got to have your playbook. It's been discussed. Who does what and where. What's automated, where notifications occur, and how you're going to respond if something like that happens. So then the next step is testing your disaster recovery plan. It is surprising, this stat is somewhat alarming, that 50% of organizations update their disaster recovery plans once a year or less. So they, we talk about the state of disaster recovery and being prepared. Really everybody should be continually reviewing. It's that time of year again. It's that end of the quarter, time to look at our disaster recovery plans. Maybe nothing's changed. Terrific. Maybe it has, right? But it's all part of that, verifying that your staff is ready, obviously, especially aware of those plans. Hey, we're updating the playbook. We're running, sorry, we just had a Super Bowl. Thinking about a football scenario, right? We've got some new plays. We've got some new things to consider, right? Or there's a new threat, right? We've got to be, the team needs to know about it. You've got to go back and make sure that your validation of your backup copy integrity is there, and don't just assume, right? But always going back and checking and making sure. And then verify that all of your applications, data, various systems are ready to be restored. There's nothing's disconnected. There's not any new systems that came online for some reason that are still being ignored. Just a sort of a status check there. And of course, you want to make sure you're meeting your service levels that you've committed to, and update that plan if necessary, right? So it kind of gets down to can you recover as quickly as you think you can? Because we talking with customers, like usually everyone's got some sort of disaster recovery plan. But I think it's a healthy exercise just to review it. Are we really there, right? And that, I know that gets back into testing and validating, but you have to be able to be able to prove it. Can I print out a report and show others that I'm there, right? And that's so what we do is have a recovery readiness report that built into the system. It helps you estimate the effectiveness of your DR settings, your operations. It displays your RPOs, your actual RPO, your recovery time objectives, and your estimated actual RTOs, or called RTAs, because you got to have another acronym. But for each client computer in all your environments, and it's sort of based on the timing of previous backup operations and your live sync operations. So it's one of those things that you're kind of continually adjusting and monitoring to make sure that you're actually meeting your requirements. The beauty of what Commvault does is, and getting a little plug for Commvault here, is automating that as well, right? So that if you're based on priorities, based on the sensitivity of data, based on whatever criteria, that we're automatically adjusting job performance and timing to meet your SLAs as they change, because they always change. So having a system that sort of learns over time and understands what normal is and what unusual is, as you have a baseline, but then you start to systems adapt and start to learn that, oh yeah, this is an approved process. It always runs at this time, but this one is critical, but it's not finishing, so I need to adjust to make sure that it's bumped up and its priority is over others, right? So it's that sort of learning and adaptation that should happen automatically. You really don't want you want your staff monitoring and checking it out and reviewing it, but not having to define those continually. And that's where, because that just becomes a complete time sink. And all of us are dealing with reduced staff, right? So here's if you remember one slide from today, because I know everybody loves PowerPoint slides, and I've thrown a lot of them at you here. But if there's one sort of image that I'd like to have you think about is, where is your company on the spectrum of improving business continuity and integrity? A lot of us, too frequently, we find ourselves splintered, right? For lack of a better term, it's fragmented. The data is everywhere, right? You've got different data protection schemes in place. You've got different data protection tools in place, right? You're not seeing the level of protection. It's less than 90%. We're talking about sometimes it's even less than that. But it's too manual. I think a lot of times we find ourselves in situations where, just because of the rapid growth of data, and it's just we get into these situations where we're relying on antiquated processes and heroic efforts by our staff to do things manually and make sure that at least some elements of my environment are protected. Obviously that's not a great state to be in, right? To put it mildly. I think the next phase is, okay, well, I've adopted a unified approach. I'm starting down that path. I've got some basic automation. At least now I've got some centralized reporting, and that's a great place to get to as a starter, because at least now you know what you still need to attack, right? Or still need to address, I should probably better say. The fact that, okay, I've got better protection, I've got better workload coverage, broader workload coverage. We see that a lot, right? Where there's certain things like, well, this tool doesn't back that up, so unfortunately it's not covered. That can be dangerous. You're introducing automation, and maybe best of all, at least importantly, you've got to have that centralized reporting. So you're getting there, right? So that's a good start. But then there's the next phase, is now I need to better understand what else I have. And that gets into discovery and awareness tools that help me also address my governance concerns. All right, and so we have a lot of customers now sort of entering into this phase, into that optimized phase, where, okay, I have automation. I want to now improve the way my workflows operate. I want to be policy driven, right? If there's a scenario where certain data types are coming from, let's just say, simply put, the executive teams or my partners or senior leadership, that data is being managed differently than an email from Lance. Okay, but simply put, I want to have policies in place, right, and plans so that that are automated that I can leverage. And so I get into a scenario where I'm managing by exception, not by rule. And so I'm getting into scenarios where I can automate as much as possible. I think another key component of this is just the sensitive data awareness, because in that governance that is required, we're all very familiar with governance in the healthcare industry, right? So it's critical, and has to be well understood and well defined, but it directly plays into how you will be ready to recover, because that data needs to be handled differently, right? And patient data being the glaring example, but there are many others that have rules on where they live, how long they live, how they can be accessed, all of that, right? We even see that in global organizations now, where organizations are like, well, it has to stay in the United States. I want to use the cloud, but it can't show up on a data center in the UK, right? Or can't show up on a data center in Singapore. It has to be, I have to be able to guarantee where it's physically located. I have to be able to report back on who can access that data. And I have to be able to report back on how well it's protected. And that's where we're seeing increasingly people are, for obvious reasons, ratcheting up that ransomware protection. And you really can't do that effectively until you do those previous steps. You really can't, until you've got everything under one roof. That's how you're going to be most effective. I mean, you can do it if you want to 5 different tools. Good luck to you. But you're going to have challenges that you otherwise don't need to have in life. So that's the next step. And then really you're finally getting to the ideal state that we all want to be at, and increasingly more and more customers are getting there. It's just that guarantee, that the confidence of its readiness is ingrained in the organization, right? I know that I can prove that I can recover quickly from anywhere to anywhere, and automation is in full effect. I'm never out of control. I define the automation, but it's running, and it's reporting, and it's validating. It's proven. I'm leveraging the cloud effectively and efficiently and at a cost effectively, right? Because we all know there are cases where cloud, you don't want to abuse it, just like anything else. You want to be able to take advantage of it as effectively as possible. And so you're getting to that hardened multi-layer, as we come to the house storyline around the ransomware defense. And the best part of it is you're setting yourself up for being able to protect other data sets as they come, because we never know what's coming. None of us are going to say, well, in 2025, I'm probably going to have this much data, and I'm going to have it in these locations, and I'm going to be running these applications. Well, probably not, right? Well, maybe, we unfortunately are not, don't have crystal balls. So you've got to be able to make sure that when you're implementing a system, as new systems, new data types come online, they can fold into it, right? And so listen, we're seeing that right now with the advent of containers and Kubernetes, right? And as people move into stateless applications and stateful data sources, that's just another data type, right? I've got to be able to protect that. I've got to be able to make sure that I've got my entire container schema protected. So not everybody's getting into the containers yet, but over the next few years, it's predicted that'll be like the next virtual machines, right? So it's going to be something that we're all going to have to deal with. You want to have a system that can take you there, and then not yet introduce yet another system, right? So at the end of the day, this continuum, everybody's a little bit different. Kind of think about where you fall in this chart, but it's worth having. It's worth looking. It's worth referring to as we kind of move up the chain, and how you address each of these areas to improve your standing. So I like to think about, hey, listen, it's I always say it's not if but when. It can happen to anybody, and it frequently does. Have that plan in place, or if you have a plan already, go back and take a fresh look at it and regularly assess it and test it, because I'm sure some of you are like, oh, I got a plan. What are you talking about? So, but it's that constant refinement, assessment, improvement, right? And doing it in a way that no one's going to argue with. It's got to be simple. It's got to be flexible. It's got to be future-proof. It's got to adapt to all my data. It's got to work with my data, not just what you think is important, Mr. Vendor. It's got to work with everything, and it's got to be efficient, which gets into your automation, gets into your policies and plans, so that things can be as effective as possible. So There's a lot to cover when it comes to recovery readiness, just a lot. And like I said, everyone's a little bit different. But I would leave you with this, that if you go to Commvault.com, go to Commvault.com/ransomware if you're particularly interested in ransomware. We have a host of different white papers, demonstrations, see how it runs yourself, webinars and advice on best practices. Regardless of whether or not you're a Commvault customer right now, we'd love you to be, by the way, and if you are, thank you. But regardless, you need to be thinking about these things, right? So I think you'll find some insight, and some information that's going to help you regardless, right? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and spare you any more slides, but I definitely want to thank you for your time. And we did cover a lot. We covered, there's a lot of detail more detail behind each one of those segments. But I wanted to convey sort of that overall recovery readiness plan with you and how you could be at least thinking about it in your particular environment. So thank you.
Thank you, Lance. I want to remind everyone that the Q&A is open and available if you have any questions for Lance at this time. We want to thank Lance for presenting to our membership today and also to Commvault as a premier sponsor. And kind of tying in with your data governance, Lance, is our next webinar session is on February 17th, which is the second of a series of 6 that is on data governance, and that registration can be found on our New England Himss website for all the members. I don't have any questions at this time, Lance. There is a survey that does conclude the session, so if anyone does have any questions, I can get those to you. There is an open-ended text box there for people to send any questions. And thank you for your time, and thank you for presenting today.
Oh, great. Thank you, and thanks everybody for showing up, and yeah, happy to help as needed.
Everyone stay safe. Thank you again.
All right. Bye, everybody.